she felt concern of political gimmicks. I was testifying against Bill C-78 at Senate, trying to block this idea, and only to realize that the sponsor of the bill herself.
Sylvain Charlebois is a renowned Canadian food professor, popularly called the Food Professor. He has authored several books, journals, and articles. He has also testified before the Canadian Senate a few times. He's ranked as one of the world's most cited scholars in food supply chain, in management, and in food value chains. Anyways, it's good to meet you.
Yeah,
and,
good to meet you as well. Yeah, thank you for reaching out.
Yeah, thanks. I read a bunch of your articles, actually. I'd read some in the past, but while I was just looking into this topic, generally, I realized every time I Googled something, your article would probably be the first or the second. So I was like, this man again? I was like, I better reach out to him then.
Yeah, no, I write a lot. We do research a lot. So I'm a scholar, first and foremost. So our job is to publish, but nobody reads these articles. So you want to talk about some of the stuff that we're doing in newspapers, podcasts. I'm a big fan of. I have my own podcast. So obviously, whenever I'm invited to join another podcast, I try to make myself available. Of course, yeah.
What's the name of your podcast?
The Food Professor. It's
right,
top rank. If you look at the rankings, we're the top Canadian produced management podcast in Canada. What do you do for a living? I'm just curious.
Like I said in the email, I finished my doctorate from Dalhousie. So I studied electrical engineering from there, master's PhD. I came from Nigeria 10 years ago. That's 2015. I studied electrical engineering as well in Nigeria, bachelor's degree. So I did my grad school here. And since 2021, I've been working in the telecoms industry. So I do research in telecoms.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what I do. I enjoy it. Actually, I did my in grad school. I wasn't in telecoms directly, but I did wireless communications for underwater acoustics.
Oh, wow.
So, of course, Halifax, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Is the leader in that. So yeah, I was researching wireless principles used for acoustic communication, and I did research as well with sonars and vessel localization. I was looking into many of your articles, like I said. I probably read 15 or 20 of them. I think I must have read them from Microsoft Edge, and I put it on read loud. I just keep listening and watching alongside. It's interesting. I picked a lot of points from a bunch of your articles. So I thought about what's the best way to start this conversation. And I thought maybe I should do a rapid fire yes or no questions to start with.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so let's do it. So you've written about tax holidays and the benefits and the shortfall in that. So let's start with this. Is the tax holiday any significant financial saving for the average Canadian, would you say? Yes or no?
Depends. No retail, yes service. So at the restaurant, you're likely going to save substantially. Like in Ontario, for example, you're basically saving 13%. But in retail, we've actually made some calculations, and the average Canadian will probably save about $4.50 over 2 months, essentially, if you are to buy the same products as usual. But obviously, with the holidays, things are a little bit different. People may actually buy more ready-to-eat products, and those products are actually taxable. The center of the store snacks are very popular during this time of year, so that number can actually go up if you're hosting, if you're eating snacks a little bit more than usual, so you're likely going to save a little bit more.
All right, that wasn't really a rapid fire.
I know, sorry.
That's okay. All right. So, will the tax relief make things worse for Canadians?
Yes.
Okay. Is this a short-sighted policy by the government?
Yes.
Does this introduce complexity into Canada's food retail system?
Absolutely. Yes.
So would you call this a misstep by the government?
I would say yes. And that's exactly what I said at Senate when I testified with David Dodge, the former governor of the Bank of Canada. Both him and I agreed that it was really just bad fiscal policy overall. Essentially, in my view, because it was a temporary measure. If you play around with taxes temporarily, it will open up the door to opportunity pricing, for example. So if you give a couple of percentages to retailers, they'll go and try to grab that extra, 2-3%, and you can actually see inflation becoming a problem again. That's been my number one concern since day one, both retail and service. So at the restaurant and at the grocery store, it's certainly very short-sighted. I don't see how Canadians will win over time. At the restaurant, of course, you're looking at major savings outside of Quebec, for example, or where there's harmonized sales tax, including Ontario. I would say that right now, a lot of people are going out. They're noticing that, well, they don't have to pay taxes, which is really, it makes a big difference. But at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily mean that menu prices aren't moving. My guess is that, and I've actually seen some menu prices already increasing as a result of more traffic with the holidays and the fact that there is a GST holiday as well.
So isn't that, let me play the devil's advocate here. I think I agree with mostly everything you've said, but let me play the devil's advocate
Sure.
here. Will that not be the fault of the retailers in that case? Because that shouldn't be the fault of the government, because now retailers are leveraging on that. Now that in quotes removed taxes from their products, right? And then they bump up the price without consumers noticing that. That's what you mean, right? But wouldn't that be a retailer's fault instead of government fault?
Well, of course, Aaron, I mean, it would be the retailers that would actually do this, but the role of government is to anticipate behavior, good or bad. It is a free market, and so companies will behave based on how policies shift over time. Opportunistic behavior is not something new. It's always been there. If you actually open up the door, if there is an opportunity for businesses to make more money, especially when margins are incredibly thin, and this is what's unusual with
Right.
food compared to other sectors. I mean, you're in a sector where margins are much, much more significant. In food,
Right.
it's a game of pennies. Pennies. So if you
Mm.
can get that extra penny or two, you will go after it. So the role of government, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is, of course, retailers and businesses, but the role of businesses is to make money. And the role of government is to anticipate opportunistic behavior.
Part of what you're into in your article is that it's going to introduce an overhead cost for retailers during this period. And we've seen cases where businesses have simply said they're not able to implement it, especially the smaller businesses. I think bigger corporations like the Costco and the like, they're able to quickly implement that. But if it introduces an overhead administrative cost for businesses, are we draining businesses more where many of them are already, strained in this economy because of affordability crisis and the cost of goods and services? Is that introducing more problems for retailers?
I think so. I mean, essentially, you're asking, and I have to look at retailers more or grocers more than restaurants, because the restaurant side of things is pretty simple. I mean, recoding the system,
True.
because everything is taxed the same.
Yeah.
If you're in Ontario, it's the provincial sales tax, the federal sales tax, harmonized, and you just recode and you're done. In a
Mm-hmm.
grocery store, you have 20,000 SKUs. Of the 20,000, about 4,600 you have a taxable product. So you got to basically go almost manually over the list and see exactly what products are exempt and which product are not exempt, because not all taxable products at the grocery store are exempt right now. So you have to basically go through manually, and we calculate it's about 200 to 300 human hours of work if you're an independent grocer, and that's a lot of money. Now, there's what's worse, I think, is the confusion and the chaos that was brought by the GST holiday, the temporary GST holiday. You see some multinationals that really will see Canada as just a market, really, like PepsiCo. They've actually published a letter on December 10th saying that we're not participating, that they won't be following the law, saying that they will continue to charge GST to their customers like Loblaws, Costco, Walmart, and everyone else because it's too complicated for a short period of time. They'd rather pay a fine than just recode their system because Canada is only 41 million people. It's a very small market
Right.
for PepsiCo. And other CPG companies have done the same. So right now, Canadians are dealing with grocers that are paying the GST up the food chain, but can't charge GST on chips and chocolate and snacks and other things like that. So it's really chaotic. My guess is that the CRA, the Canada's Revenue Agency, will be incredibly busy. And of course, retailers are getting a lot of flack. They're getting a lot of criticism from customers because in some cases there are some errors, and right now there are reports that sometimes some grocers have decided not to opt because hours before the implementation of the GST holiday, the government did say that they won't enforce the law. They can't follow
Right.
and surveil compliance. So right now, basically, they are saying, well, it's the law, but we won't watch. That will create awkward situations. So if you're a customer, you're going to a grocery store, you check your receipt, and all of a sudden you say, "Wow, I've been charged the GST." Are you going to ask the grocer, "Are you participating or not?" So yeah,
Oh, you'll likely ask at the checkout, not before you get in.
and now you got to line up. You got to go to customer service. You may be busy, too busy to do that because it takes time. So you can
Right.
imagine the awkwardness and the chaos that was brought forward by the GST holiday, which really became law, but how it's been implemented is very much optional. And so that puts Canadians and consumers in a very awkward position to ask or ask whether or not the retailer is actually participating.
And I think the timing is awful too.
Oh,
This is the busiest time of the
oh,
year. Don't you think
oh.
so?
So 40% of profits made by grocers is in November and December. So really it is
Hmm.
the worst time of year to do this. And of course they only had a few weeks to the law itself, Bill C-78, received royal assent 2 days before its implementation. So my guess is that some independent grocers were just waiting, and they had 2 days to comply. And of course, when it ends on February 14th, they're gonna have to redo all the work they did back in December. So it's really a lot of work for little benefit, really, for Canadians. I think, I mean, they could have done two things here with the law. Either, and I did suggest to senators, maybe they should consider a permanent cut, like Harper did back in 2006 and 2008, or they should actually increase GST rebates given to Canadians that actually need it.
But still talking about this GST rebate. Today is a waste collection day in my area. So as I was trying to pack the black bin, I stumbled on receipts in the house. And I became curious that, oh, how much taxes are on these receipts, by the way? Here
Do
is
you
a
check your receipts
$12.
often?
No, no. I just check if they billed me right for products, but I'm not checking for taxes.
Yeah.
But
And how do
probably
you
this is the
know?
first
Like,
time I'm.
depending of the retailer, sometimes you don't even know on what you paid taxes for because the way it's designed.
Right, but here I have a $13 bill. I don't see any taxes on it. I have a $49 bill. It says my subtotal and total is actually the same, so meaning there's no taxes on it likely. And this one is from yesterday, just to stop over at the store after church. This is a $30 bill. My taxes on it is 50 cents. How does this make sense as a huge financial saving, according to Justin Trudeau and his departed finance minister?
Well, yeah, Chrystia Freeland. Let's talk about the former Minister of Finance. So she sponsored the bill. She sponsored the bill, Bill C-78. And I was
Sure.
actually quite upset when she resigned and wrote that letter to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau because in her letter it mentioned that she felt concern of political gimmicks. And
Gimmick, right? Yeah.
and the GST holiday is a political gimmick. And I was testifying against Bill C-78 at Senate, trying to block this idea, and only to realize that the sponsor of the bill herself was not necessarily on board with what was going on. So that's when you really understand that Parliament right now is completely, utterly dysfunctional. I mean, we absolutely need a reset
Mm.
here. Whether it's a prorogation or an election, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter who wins. I actually do think that
Mm.
right now we need a reset. This parliament is needs to be renewed as quickly as possible because it's not working at all. Like I've actually had discussions with MPs over the last few days on both sides, conservatives and liberals, and you can tell that these people are miserable. They're actually, putting forward private members' bills. They're sponsoring bills they don't believe in because they're just forced because they're desperate. They want to win votes. And as soon as you actually are desperate politically, it brings forward bad policy for Canadians.
That's not good.
That's not
That's not
good.
good.
No,
But
absolutely
they,
not. No. Because I do think that the Trudeau regime did bring forward in the past some good policy for Canadians because it was consistent with its vision for Canada. I didn't agree with all of it, most of it, but it's a vision. I mean, they had a vision and they actually went forward with implementing that vision. But right now, there's no vision at all. It's just desperation. It's political desperation.
right. So, talking about political desperation and the resignation by the departed finance minister. You mentioned in her letter also that she talked about some of the spending as being a political gimmick. I was also talking to Dr. Lydia Miljan, who is a political scientist, just 2 days ago. One of the things she identified in her research work was the fact that Chrystia Freeland introduced a lot of permanent spending in the 4-year period that she spent in office. Permanent spending in the sense of the dental care, farmer care, and
Yeah,
the
major
child
federal
care.
programs. Yeah.
Yeah, those are major federal programs. But even more sinister than that was that she identified that the press release from the government, as well as media scrutiny, failed to highlight the cost of those bills or those programs and how government would pay for them. And the media failed the people because of that. I think that's worth noting by every means. And when we talk also about this temporary tax cuts that we're seeing during this holiday period, including the proposed $250 that we don't know if that's going to pass or not, nobody actually, up until now, even watching the news, listening to the radio, I am yet to see anyone asking, one, what is the cost of this on Canadians? Because eventually it's Canadians who are going to pay for this in the
Yes.
longer run. What is the cost and where do we get this money from? You wrote in your article this is going to be about $2 billion deficit on agri-food industry. I hope I'm correct about that. But what are you thinking with respect to the cost and how does the government bridge that gap in cost?
I think it's been clear since day one. The deficit wasn't necessarily a priority for the Trudeau government at all. I don't think it's ever been a priority. They actually did look at, of course, debt per GDP as an important measure. And yes, that could be a measure, but they didn't look at GDP per capita, for example, as an indicator of productivity. Because if you're looking at debt versus GDP, and you're not looking at productivity
Right.
or efficiency of your economy, you're going to be in trouble. And they never actually looked at that. That's how you pay your bills. I don't think that fiscal responsibility was ever there at all. And now we're paying for it because we do have permanent, very expensive programs, and we do have a very centralist government because it's for the Liberals, and this is not just with Justin Trudeau. It was the same with his father. It was the same with Jean Chrétien. Back in the 90s, the approach was very centralist. And so they actually developed and ran programs centrally, and that becomes very expensive for the federal government. That's what we're seeing with the federal daycare program, with pharma care, with dental care. All these programs are run federally, and that tends to cost more. The carbon tax is another centralized policy as well. The CRA actually employs more than 60,000 people. That's 10,000 more compared to just 18 months ago.
The United States.
10,000 people
Oh,
for the CRA. Now you may think, well, the CRA, that's like the sales department for the government, because if you actually hire people working for Revenue Canada, you will increase revenues. That's not what's going on. You're just basically building capacity to run programs, and that comes at a cost for Canadians. That's the danger we're in right now. So the $62 billion we heard from Karen Gould
the false statement.
on
Right.
Monday, it was supposed to be Minister Freeland, but now it was
Mhm.
the leader of the House, Karen Gould. I think a lot of Canadians should be alarmed and concerned about this sum because it is huge. Huge. I mean, $62 billion is a lot of money, and there is no plan to
Right.
how to repay for this. There is no plan.
Yeah, yeah, and especially the 62 billion versus the projected 40 billion dollars. That's about 55%
That's a huge
increment over
miss.
that.
And frankly,
Yeah, it is.
Canadians, my concern, and I think, and I mean, I have kids, I have young kids that are of voting age, and they're realizing that their future is going to be compromised by higher taxes, probably. Because someone will have to pay for this. I think that's really the problem right now is that you do have a government that is in a free fall politically, but economically, it really has positioned Canada in a weak position because it's not normal to not be in lockstep economically with the United States. We're just north of the United States, and typically, if the Americans do well economically, Canada usually does well, especially with a weak currency. And our currency is weaker now. So if you look at the Jean Chrétien years from 93 to 2002, 2003, his regime was all about a weaker currency, but the economy did well. But now that it's the opposite, we have a weak currency. America's economy is doing incredibly. It's hot. It's really, really good, but we're not benefiting from that resilience coming from the United States. So we're in trouble. We're in trouble.
Right. So, speaking about Jean Cartier, I was actually like I said, I'm an immigrant. I've been here 10 years, so it's taken a lot of work actually studying Canadian politics, especially the events that didn't happen during the time when I've been here. So I was actually just reading about Jean Cartier, just a
I mean,
few.
you're a new Canadian. You've been here for a decade, but you weren't born here. What do you think about what's happening? Because all you know basically is Trudeau as prime minister. You
Trudeau,
didn't really
right?
see the Harper years, and so what are your thoughts as a new Canadian?
Oh God, I like this, but
Sorry to reverse, but I'm really curious. I mean, are you concerned? Are you okay? Because I mean, what's your thought? What are your thoughts?
I'll tell you, Dr. Charlebois, it's in part one of the reasons why I stepped out to do a podcast. And it's because I'm deeply concerned that one, the promise of the country that I had coming into Canada is different from the reality that I'm living 10 years after. And I think a lot of immigrants would agree with that.
Because you
I look at it
chose
like this.
Canada for a reason. I was born
As a
here, so I
matter
didn't
of
choose
fact,
Canada.
As a matter of fact, yes. And it's, on a tangent here, when we talk about even the high immigration numbers and the way it's portrayed now, and then government brings in immigrants and they say it's not the duty of government to find accommodation for immigrants. I would say yes. But your duty to provide policies that will sustain the immigrants while they are here. It's an unwritten agreement between government and an immigrant that is coming in that we are promising you the potential good life that you could have here because there are several other countries that you could have chosen. I chose to come here. I say I'm an economic immigrant. I went to school here, studied really hard, thinking that okay, a time will come when things become better, and as you earn, as you do well economically, you can actually afford better things. But it looks like that promise is fleeting. So it's almost like the goalpost was moving on me here and there as I progressed in Canada. It's become a form of a government lies, to say the least. And I'm really being honest with you,
Wow,
and I know many immigrants would agree with this. It's
really?
become a lie, a moving goalpost on people. I came into Canada, I'll give you an example. I came into Canada, my tuition per year was $18,000 at Dalhousie University.
And thank you
Right
for that, by
now,
the way.
yeah. Right now, I don't know how much to pay at Dalhousie for international students, but I look at a place like Carleton, Ottawa here. Tuition plus differential fee, international differential fees, it pushes the fee up to about 40,000, 50,000.
Yeah.
The value that people get versus that amount, I don't see it. I can't justify such. And then you finish school, the jobs are not there. You finish school, affordability has gone to the winds now in Canada. When I moved to Halifax 2015, I shared a 2-bedroom apartment. Yes, three of us share the 2-bedroom apartment. I paid $275 per month.
Wow.
That's how little it was. Right now, that same apartment goes for well over 1,400 per month.
Yep.
The first car that I bought in Halifax, I bought it a 2014 Toyota Corolla. I bought it 12,500. The last appraisal on that car is $14,000.
Wow.
That's how bad it is.
And
The
so,
salaries have not
so
improved.
you feel, I mean, this is shocking because the liberals tend to be incredibly popular with new Canadians, and what you're saying basically is that the current regime has actually failed you as someone who chose Canada to increase your to better your faith essentially, and and to find a new life, a better life.
Yeah, let me be clear also, because I know people will come after me for saying all of that. But let me be clear. Canada, compared to many other countries, is a great country. I just had the conversation with an immigrant about that also on the podcast. Like, if you compare with many African countries, Canada is doing way, way, way better. There's even no basis for comparison. If you compare with some autocratic nations in the Middle East or communist nations around the world, Canada is doing great. But if you compare Canada with itself, the decline is obvious.
I think you're coming from, this is how I'm reading your comments. I think you're coming from a place of disappointment, and you see Canada as a great country that, I mean, essentially I think you're recognizing Canada has a lot of potential, but it's not reaching that potential at all.
You just nailed it.
Yeah.
There is a
And I
huge
agree. I
potential in the
agree
nation.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, huge potential in the nation. And goodness, how many times have I considered maybe I should relocate elsewhere? But you also look at the climate elsewhere and it's like, I better think about this carefully. But yeah, that's my opinion.
Well,
I'll let people be the judge in the
I've been
comment
offered a
section.
job to the U.S. and I've said no because I mean there are great opportunities in the U.S. I mean, you probably know right now the U.S. is really going after key Canadian academics because they know that universities are in trouble financially. You see, your role as an international student. So I used to be dean at Dal. When you were actually
All
at
right.
Dal, I was dean at Dal. I was dean of the Faculty of Management.
All
International
right.
tuition, so that double tuition didn't go to faculties, it went to central, which made administrations addicted to international student tuition. And a lot of students don't know that. But so you paid tuition, okay? That went to faculty. That double tuition went to the president's office. So central
I
administration
see.
became addicted to that money. And now that money is not coming in as much. So
Mm,
many universities, including Dalhousie, and there are I think 20 of the 22 universities in Ontario are losing money now, including Carleton, including the University of Ottawa. All of them are losing money because they're trying to figure out a way to increase revenues without the support of that double tuition. But
mm,
academic units never benefited from that international student. The people delivering programs, okay? The faculty, the staff, close to students, the people you interacted with, there was no infrastructure, there was no support. So they're not basically, they weren't benefiting from that double tuition, but they will be paying for it because right now they're looking at laying off a lot of faculty and staff as a result. So, but
So you're saying there is a likely brain drain in academia right now in Canada?
I think it's, yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be, it's going to get worse. Yeah, absolutely. And I can feel that a lot of Ivy League universities in the US know that many universities in Canada are vulnerable financially. And so they'll be going after some key scholars and bring them to the US with higher salaries and better benefits.
That is awful.
And of course, with a weaker
That's
dollar,
awful. Yeah. Hmm.
it makes, yeah, I mean, it's some of the offers are pretty interesting. I'll be honest with you. I mean,
Hmm.
yeah.
Well, you said you've been given an offer. I'm certain you're enjoying this conversation right now and you can't wait to get back into it. But permit me to hold you for a second here. More than 95% of the viewers on the channel haven't subscribed yet. And it goes a long way in helping the channel. But if you can click on the subscribe button right now, it will go a long way in helping to improve the quality of the work on the channel and the quality of guests that you see on this channel every time. Please do me that favor, click on the subscribe button. I want to achieve 20% subscriber to viewer count this time. Let's get back into the conversation. Let's try to kind of, walk our way back into our conversation about the GST tax holiday. We started talking about the US, and I actually want to get your thoughts also about the Trump taking office in January, there's a potential 25% tariff
Tariff, yeah.
on Canadian products. Yeah, I was reading one of your articles where you talked about the fact that 60% of the agri-food exports from Canada goes to the United
Yep.
States. So I would imagine that a 25% tariff, which people say it's a threat. I think maybe it's a threat, but likely not a political gimmick by Trump, because I don't think he's up for any political gimmick. I think he wants to please the people that voted for him, at least. That's my imagination about Trump and the US. But how do you think that's going to affect Canada if that goes through?
Well, I mean, I have to look at it from an agri-food perspective, and my
Yes,
guess. I mean, we did publish Canada's food price report a couple of weeks ago, and our bet is that it won't affect agri-food. You may actually see some tariffs of 25%, but keep in mind, Folarian, I mean, 25% in the agri-food sector is huge. Given small margins, if you're
the
Tyson or
margins, right?
Cargill in the US and you're buying Canadian pork or beef and you have to pay an extra 25%, chances are you're going to go to Brazil. You're going to go to Mexico. You're going to go Mexico may actually be exposed to tariffs as well, but you're likely going to have to shop around a little bit more. And so that $42 billion worth of food we sell to the US is basically a quarter of our entire agri-food sector. And so
Huh.
it's really significant. And so that's why it would be quite impactful if the 25% actually is realized and actually is implemented against the agri-food sector. I don't think it will happen because it will actually negatively impact American consumers first.
American, yeah.
And we
Yes.
all know Kamala Harris lost her election because Americans are concerned about the cost of living. I mean, that's one major factor why she lost, other than, the fact that Biden didn't step out earlier or whatever. But people were discontent with their financial situation.
The cost
And
of
and
living, yeah.
and Mr. Trump knows that. And so I don't think he wants to repeat that same mistake for
Right.
sure.
Right, but I think that's even the potential 25% tariff, and this is me just thinking about it out loud. I think it's telling more on the structural and economic vulnerability in Canada, and I think Trump sees that. And the guy being who he is, that's why he's kind of leveraging on that. Like, I'm going to punch you really hard on that side that hurts
Oh
you.
yeah.
I think it's a structural and economic vulnerability
Well, I mean,
that's
I think he's
making
threatened.
the room for
I think
that,
he's
right?
threatened the whole world by now. Like he's threatened the EU. He's threatened Asia with more tariffs. And we were learning this weekend that he actually wants to take control of the Panama Canal. I mean, there's lots. That's his. It's more style than policy, I think. And we've seen that in the past. I mean, in 2016, he actually said the same kinds of things, and the style didn't go away. And so we have to be careful with how I've always been more concerned about Ottawa than Washington, because it's not just about what Washington wants to do, it's more about how Ottawa would handle things. And right now,
Hmm.
Trump knows that Ottawa is incredibly vulnerable, which is why I think we need an election. And if Trudeau wins again, well, at least he'll have a mandate, and he'll have a new cabinet, a fresh start. And so Trump will know that Trudeau has a clear new mandate. If it's Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, then it will be the Conservatives. It doesn't matter. We really need a stronger Ottawa right now to deal with a Trump administration, because he feels and smells blood like really hard.
Well, if Trudeau wins again, I hope a leopard can change its spot. I really hope so.
You know what? I've learned something. You never underestimate a Trudeau in Canada. You never know. And Canada is inherently a liberal country. And I know you've been here for 10 years, but we go through cycles in Canada. We actually elect the liberals because it feels natural. And then to clean house, we elect conservatives. And after two elections, we realized that conservatives have no personality at all, and we want something exciting again, so we elect the liberals back. And that's how Trudeau was
Right.
elected.
Right. So yeah, I've been doing a lot of reading, like I said, about Canadian politics, the history side of it. So I did a monologue recently, and I said I think Canadians don't elect leaders; they vote them out. And people found it very funny.
Yeah. So I'm not familiar with the Nigerian government and Nigerian politics in general, but Canada has a risk averse electorate. I mean, basically, and it's always in the center, and it wants to be in the center. The party that wins redefines the center. So conservatives once in a while, and
Right.
that's what Pierre Poilievre is trying to do right now. He's trying to redefine the center so he can win. He'll get elected in for a while. The problem with the conservatives is that they don't have a natural ally in the House, whereas the liberals will have more options. They can actually go with the bloc. They can rely on the NDP. They can rely on the Greens, but conservatives are typically to the right, and they don't necessarily have a natural ally. The most natural
Mhm.
ally they would have is probably the bloc, because the bloc is a decentralist party, just like the conservatives.
Right. Let's begin to wrap up like this. There is a recurring theme in your articles, and it's actually the removal of food taxes permanently.
Yes.
Almost all of your articles, you talk about it. So I thought, okay, that must be very important to you. You mentioned there, just quoting one of your articles, you say some people have even argued that the idea of food taxes is immoral. Let me read a quote here from one of your articles. That food is a necessity and imposing taxes on it is widely regarded as regressive, and some argue even immoral.
Yes, I've said that for many, many years. I actually don't think that it's up to the government to make a product or a food product less financially attractive just because it is deemed less nutritious or something like that. It is up to the consumer to decide, I think, at the end of the day. Taxing food is immoral because some people will actually buy food because they don't have a choice, because the convenience store is probably the closest outlet they have access to, and they don't have a car, for example. Like when you look at some of the food deserts that we have in Canada, in many cases people don't have a car, and the only place they can actually buy food is at a convenience store, and in a convenience store a lot of the food is taxed. So I've always believed that, and when you look at ready to eat products, the counter ready product is becoming huge. Think of seniors that can't cook. Think of people who don't want to waste food at home. Right now it's the holidays, and some people will actually be flying elsewhere, and they don't want to waste food because they're going to go away for 2 weeks. Section of the grocery store is very important, but all of that is taxed. But it's like we're talking salads, sandwiches, good healthy products. It shouldn't be taxed. One example of why taxes are a bad idea is Newfoundland right now. A couple of years ago, Newfoundland actually implemented a soda tax, soda pop taxes, and to discourage people from drinking soda. But
Right.
what we realize over 2 years is that the government is actually making $12 million on that tax right now, and consumption has gone up, not down. Why? Because the supply chain absorbed the tax to keep similar price points at retail. So consumers didn't see the difference. That's why basically applying taxes on food is just not a good idea, because the supply chain will adjust prices to actually keep these products as attractive as possible. Let the consumer decide, but don't weaponize the food chain to increase revenues publicly.
So you're saying that research shows now, or even like data shows that introducing taxes on, in quote, bad food products does not necessarily mitigate the consumption of those items. This is kind of like carbon taxes too, I think.
Well, of course. Well, yes, absolutely, to a certain extent. I mean, Mexico has introduced a soda tax for many years now. Some studies actually suggest that soda consumption has gone down, but some studies have actually shown that soda consumption has gone up. So you can see that taxing food is a political wedge, is a political issue. And but at the end of the day, I actually don't think that governments have any business taxing anything that is consumable at all,
Hmm.
except for, of course, except for alcohol and except for restaurants. I actually do think that when service is provided, people should pay a tax on that.
On the other side of this argument, and I'm imagining now playing the devil's advocate again, what people might say instead is one, government is going to lose revenue if they stop taxing some food items, $2 billion we just talked about in the space of 2 months, for instance. If they lose revenue, what about maybe implementing like price caps for retailers, or even like
That would be even
what do you call it,
worse.
like a windfall taxes
That's
instead.
even worse. Again, if you actually cap prices, guess what's going to happen? Companies won't invest anymore. They'll just walk away. They won't see the food industry as a good place to invest. One good example of price caps and how they don't work is Quebec. So in all provinces, fluid milk is sold. The only province where retail prices are regulated in Canada is in the province of Quebec. You're in Ottawa. If you go to Gatineau, go into a grocery store and buy milk. You're going to notice that milk in Quebec is probably twice as more expensive than in Ottawa. Why?
I know that.
Why? Because prices are regulated. So price caps ideologically could be seen as a good idea to protect consumers, but it's the how you regulate and what price you're going to set. So what's going on in Quebec, and I was part of that process when before I became an academic, I was a lobbyist. I was a lobbyist for the retailers in Quebec. My job was to increase milk prices as much as possible so retailers could actually make more money. And who represents consumers? Nobody at the table. You had farmers with lawyers, you had retailers with lawyers and lobbyists like me, people deciding on what should be the appropriate price at retail were overwhelmed by the power of the supply chain versus what consumers wanted. And what consumers wanted, of course, is cheap milk. So caps could be seen as a good idea, but it's an awful idea. Awful idea.
So what about if we talk about say windfall taxes and just pass the taxes on to the retailers instead? This is an argument also by some ideologues. I am pro businesses, so I may not
Well, you seem
necessarily
like a pro
agree with
business
that,
kind of
but
guy too. Yeah, I can tell. But you're playing devil's advocate, and let's play that along. I mean, basically, so margins. If you look at Loblaw's spreadsheet, Metro, Empire, Sobeys, their net margins is 2 to 4%, depending of the chain that you're looking at. If you implement a windfall tax in groceries, guess who's going to pay for that?
the consumer.
Yeah, because they will want to
Yeah.
maintain that margin as much as possible. Banks, their profit margins, I mean, the Royal Bank of Canada made more money in the last quarter than all grocers in Canada made in the last year combined. And there is a windfall tax in banking in Canada, but they can afford it, you know?
Mm,
But when when
right.
when a windfall tax was implemented by Trudeau, it was in 2017, I think. The intent was to actually protect consumers and bring down banking fees. Has your banking fees been lowered?
Hell no.
No, it's gone up.
No.
It's gone up
Oh, yeah.
because they're paying a windfall tax.
Mm,
Yeah.
I see. I didn't know that. Well, that I think that's a good way to wrap things up. But leave a final word, because you mentioned, I noted this. You said Canadians ought to be deeply concerned
Yep.
about the state of things right now. You talked about that at the Parliament, and you talked about economic concerns that Canadians should have. The question people ask me, especially when I do this monologue, when I read the comment section, is, so what am I supposed to do apart from, just talking about all this mentally stimulating conversations? What should I do as Canadian? Because in quote, you feel sabotaged in any system, right? In the 4-year period when a government is in power. But what could people do?
Well, I think first of all, when you look at behavior in Canada, I think Canadians are actually smarter than they were just a couple of years ago. As shoppers, as taxpayers as well, they're more aware of what's happening. I firmly believe that. And frankly, I think that 2025 will be a much better year for everyone than 2024. I think 2024 was the bottom financially and politically. I think that in 2025, I do believe that interest rates won't be as much of a problem. Wages have actually caught up to inflation, by the way. So that's helpful. And so, really, I think we should be hopeful looking at 2025 as grocery shoppers. And politically, I think there is some unfinished business. We're ending the year 2024 with some unfinished business in Ottawa, but I do think in 2025 we'll sell a lot of scores and for the betterment of our country. And so I'm very hopeful about 2025, to be honest.
Oh, that's great. People can use some hope here, definitely. So that's
Exactly.
a message of hope for Canadians from the great Dr. Charlebois.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining me this time. I had a good time actually chatting through these
That
issues, and
was
I
great.
learned a
Yeah.
lot, which in part is what I enjoy most about doing this. Honestly, learning from people that I talk to, and a lot of times they send me back to reading online or even grab a book from the library to just kind of follow up on
But
something I
Alpha
just learned.
Laren, I promise you one day you'll be proud again of selecting Canada as your home. I'm sure.
I believe that. I do believe that. I love to be hopeful. Well, thank you very, very much. I appreciate
Take
it.
care. Happy holidays.
Yeah, happy holidays and Merry Christmas to you too.
Merry Christmas.
But thank you again. I really, really, I hope you enjoyed the
I
conversation. Did
did.
you?
Yeah. And thank you for the invitation. Yeah.
Well, have a great time out there.
All right. Take care.
Revaluate is a project I embarked upon to spark meaningful conversations that can inspire critical thinking as we navigate the adventures of life. The analytics on this channel show about 95% of the viewers on the channel haven't subscribed yet. So you do me a favor by clicking the subscribe button right now. Then I'll keep my promise to continually improve on the quality of the conversations that are produced on this channel every time.